如果你玩过赛博朋克2077的往日之影扩展包，那一定不会忘记与奇美拉的战斗。这是一台巨大的蜘蛛型机器坦克，它会对玩家穷追不舍，摧毁一切障碍，最终将玩家逼入一场生死对决。这是整部游戏中规模最大的 Boss 战，也是开发商 CD Projekt RED 需要构建的一个极为复杂的场景。
We wanted this boss fight to be the biggest and the most epic in the Cyberpunk game.
We wanted to have this, gigantic behemoth of robot that somehow is turning against you, but we didn't know at the beginning how it's gonna turn against you.
You will not believe how many issues we had with this.
Son of a bitch went haywire!
那么这个复杂的任务是如何设计出来的呢？我们采访来自不同部门的多位开发者，了解了制作过程中的各种乐趣与挑战。以下就是往日之影的奇美拉 Boss 战，从概念到实现的过程。奇美拉的设计过程从一个简单的命题，一场与巨型坦克 BOSS 展开的激烈战斗开始。
I had a very small brief, and it was something like this. We want to do a boss fight that will be a spider tank. Internally, we always refer to it as a spider tank, but in fact, it's not a spider because it has 6 legs, so it's not really a spider, and it's not actually a tank.Because it doesn't have a crew. So Chimera fits better.
For a moment, we became this kind of military designers creating a tank, right? And figuring out how, with this advanced technology, how we will be designing this device so it could actually potentially operate in real time.
At the beginning, we didn't have this almost claustrophobic environment in mind. So we also thought about maybe we can have this tank jumping around.But we decided that we wanted something heavier, something scary.
这种对重量和厚重感的追求影响了奇美拉的整体外观，它被设计成在狭小空间里极富压迫感的样子，同时也与体型相对较小的玩家形成了强烈的对比。
Thought that it would be perfect with this kind of man versus the machine, David versus the Goliath moment where we have to, as a single person, fight with something so massive and elaborate and powerful.
We didn't have a perfect gameplay idea at the beginning, so we started with many legs, high legs, something smaller, something bigger. When one of those sketches were chosen, we were like, okay, now we need to block it out, so we have a very rough 3D model so they can test it in the level. That one was a little bit more similar to the final one, and I tried to keep the shape as similar to that block out, even when I started adding details in 3D and, make it more believable, more like a real tank.
So there was a lot of iterations on even an accomplished model of changing something, replacing things, adding range of motion, tweaking something so it has a capability of rotating faster, moving faster, etc. Adding grenade launchers, eventually adding also the drone compartments, which were not part of the original design, but it was needed to add an additional phase of the combat in the third stage of boss fight.
尽管奇美拉最终既不是蜘蛛，也不是坦克，但如果你仔细观察设计，你仍然能看到一些最初设计的痕迹。
If you look closely at the design of the tank, and if you look at the rear section, there's a quite big door. At the beginning, we didn't know that we are not going to use a crew. So that door was supposed to be the opening for the crew, but we ended up having a huge drone, essentially, and the door is still there.
Meet the Chimera, a combat prototype from militant stables.
作为一台自动化机器，而不是由人驾驶的载具，奇美拉能够以更具动物特性的方式移动，没有了人类的限制，它的动作可以更加自由，并且反映出其仿生学的本质。
We were mostly relying on scorpions, beetles, things that have 6 legs, because it's very important to, pick up the balance on how he's moving, the motion, the body motion that Chimera is showing through the entire sequence, how heavy it's gonna be, always having some contact point on one of the legs so, it doesn't unbalance. We need to figure out how to add a little mechanical flavor on top of it, because it's a robot in the end, right? And it's made of mechanical parts. So that's why, for example, we try to have the turret and the main body stabilized, and only the lower body with the legs is what is moving around. That gives us two things. First of all, it gives you the feeling of it's a machine, and he's trying to, stabilize the camera around you to follow you better or to target you better with the tracking systems. But at the same time, always when there is some movement on the body and a stabilized head, traditionally, animation and body motion gives you a creepy feeling, so it's something unsettling, which adds to this horror vibe that we have, right?
这种既动物化又机械化的感觉，也需要通过这头金属怪物的音效设计传达出来。因此，它独一无二的声音融合了自然、数字和魔鬼般的元素。
We wanted the Chimera to sound mechanical, but not fully robotic. We wanted to be also something like alive. Robotic growls help a lot with this, and also as the sequence progresses, the vocalization of the Chimera changes from friendly one to really like almost demonic black hole sounds.
黑墙是《往日之影》中位于百灵鸟故事核心的一股腐化力量，所以它的音效需要被设计得十分具有压倒性。无论是巨大的奇美拉还是百灵鸟自己，所有与之接触的事物都会被无情吞噬。这是一个它和玩家都无法逃脱的音频地狱。
I think the coolest and the most interesting thing about Black and how it sounds is that it wasn't supposed to be futuristic sci-fi. It's supposed to be like the descriptors I got from both the narrative director and the lead cinematic designers. They were talking about shamanistic sounds, cyber monsters. Essentially, you would need to create sounds of cyber hell. A lot of it came down to figuring out some synthetic sources that actually sound animalistic and then making them a little bit more cybernetic. So, for example, chopping them down into super small sections and stuffing them. So it's like they're glitching out when they're trying to communicate with you, and also a lot of them are growling at you to show that they're aggressive.
黑墙音效的进一步灵感来自于共同制作这部分流程的其他非音频部门。由于 CD Projekt RED 在赛博朋克2077发布后实行了一种全新的组织结构，才使得这种合作得以可能。奇美拉出现的任务蛛网下的苍鹰正是重要的试验对象之一。
It was a bit tricky from our side because it was the first time in the company that we were divided into what is called content teams. So it's like a multidisciplinary team based on every discipline that we want to create this sequence. So everyone kind of participate into the design, into their own ideas, into indirectly and indirectly around it. So we have environment artists, we have animators, we have designers, we have gameplay, we have level design. So everything together to create the best approach to this. So starting with this pre-visualization, we try to move forward and explore ideas together to see, if this is working, if it's not working, what we need and where. So trust me, it was a very, very, very intricate process.
这种不断迭代正是内容团队工作方式的一种体现。每个设计部门的成员都需要不断与对方沟通，确保视觉设计、动画与游戏玩法的目标协同一致。
We needed to have this heaviness, this weight that it's tons of steel chasing you. But at the same time, later we have a boss fight, so we have to balance it out with gameplay that has other requirements, right? Because this is for me, this sequence is for me one of the biggest achievements we did in terms of blending gameplay with cinematics. We try to all the time mixing those two in several intensities during the whole sequence.
赛博朋克2077以巧妙融合游戏的玩法与电影化演出而闻名。制作组的目标是，即使在固定脚本演出时，也不会完全剥夺玩家的控制权。奇美拉的战斗就是这样一个精心打磨的场景，游戏玩法与电影化团队在此紧密协作，创造出了一场令人难忘的体验。
This is like one example when the tank is rising up for the first time in this room with the cloth tarp, and he's shooting at you. So he's actually starting to shoot at you in the middle also of his animation that makes him go to gameplay. Normally you would have like cut, like a fade out and fade in, or maybe something will glitch at the transition from gameplay to scene. And in Cyberpunk, especially in this sequence, we always strive for making it invisible, basically. And the fact that you ask me which parts are cinematic means that I did my job well, because it's just unnoticeable. Almost the whole sequence, except for maybe just the fight itself, which is completely gameplay driven, is actually a cinematic sequence. Sometimes intertwined with gameplay, because for example, when Tank is shooting down the Kurt's enemies on the balcony, this is a cinematic animation. There are dialogues being played by the characters. There are even like contextual animations played on V where she's covering her face from the missiles. But the soldiers that are on the balconies actually have gameplay behavior, but we did it in a way that the turret swipe is so, let's say, meticulous that they will die anyways. So it's kind of a risky mix we did, but it worked out in the end.
Quick! Through here! Do you have a death wish?
接下来，任务从宽敞的博物馆空间转入狭窄的走廊，而随着奇美拉的紧追不舍，这个幽闭的走廊也显得更加压迫感十足。这是一个以知进退为原则设计的追逐场景，坦克过于强大，单枪匹马根本无法战胜。如果你尝试硬碰硬，很快就会见识到它有多么致命。
We kind of try to make sure that it's impossible to fight with it. Even if you approach in that moment, probably he's gonna kill you. There are several fail states that we create along the whole sequence, right? And that one is the first one. But I will say 90% of the players run away the first time, right? Because it's too scary.
对于玩家来说，向前奔跑或许是一项简单的任务，但对于开发团队来说，要在这个环境中实现这一点并不容易。
The chase part was a challenge in that regard, where we had to align the speed of the tank, which wasn't an easy task to do because it was completely animation driven, so any change in his movement would require some animation tweaks also. Align that with how fast the player can go, because the player can be a bit faster or a bit slower, and for every type of your build, it still needs to work and it still needs to feel like he's right on your toes, but he can never catch you if you're actively running from him.
Animation-wise, it was a bit of a challenge to put this gigantic beast inside the corridor because it's pretty difficult to make him move. So we decided that he's destroying everything on his path. It was the best way to, first create this horror feeling, and if you look back in that corridor, which is funny because, I animated kind of everything with the Chimera moving forward, right? And destroying everything on its path. And probably 99% of the players don't look back, which is kind of sad for me, but as well it's kind of successful, right? Because they are scared, they are genuinely scared.
然而，追逐场景不仅仅是为了吓唬玩家，它还有另一个重要目标，即为接下来战斗做铺垫。
One of the goals in the sequence for us was to foreshadow as much of the stuff the tank is doing as it is possible. Like, for example, you shouldn't be close to it. Like, being close to it means death. He has a turret that is deadly. He has a laser swipe that is also deadly. So then, when you actually fight him, you know what a given attack is, because we solved it already through the sequence that precedes it.
在大战之前，玩家会经历一次漫长的下坠，穿过层层破裂的混凝土和金属结构。这段极为复杂的过渡场景是整个任务制作过程中最大的技术挑战之一。
That was kind of my own personal baby, actually. I wanted to create a bigger action sequence instead of just falling. So I took some inspiration actually from some other places, like for example, the Uncharted 4 Clock Tower sequence. Like, you are trying to grab for your life in everything you find. We have these cables, you are on top of the tank again, and you have to jump out, you don't arrive, and everything is crumbling around you. And at the same time, to give this scale, I had another inspiration that I like a lot. Gandalf falling with Balrog from Bridge of Khazad-dûm. So it's like this massive falling, but you are still kind of fighting, and you have this behemoth on your side, so that you're watching falling with you, right? And there were a couple of inspirations there to fight with it, and in the end, try to achieve this result of insane action sequence that it was very, very difficult from an animation point of view to achieve, actually.
For the longest time, we couldn't really make it work. Really, on the reviews that we had, we needed to be like, this will work eventually. Please trust us. We will make it happen. But there were some sort of tricks that we had to do there. For example, when V is falling down through the air, when you actually would fall, you would fall much faster. But we had to kind of fake it a bit to achieve better effect and to make it also readable. Because in sequences, especially first-person ones, everything that you see is dictated by your, perceivable angle of vision. We really had to be careful on what we present and how, for the player to even understand what's happening with him in that sequence, and achieving that wasn't an easy task, and it went through many, many iterations.
How do you plan from an animation point of view falling through 3 floors in motion capture, right? So what we did is we had an incredible stunt team. We kind of divided into several clips. So you have your fallings, everything is recorded actually in motion capture, which looks insane, but everything is recorded like from the ground level, of course. We're not throwing anyone 3 floors down. Later, we have to cut and clip everything, cut and paste every single bit so it makes sense, but with the same timing and with the same pacing that we have before. And it was incredible to work with that, but it was kind of a gigantic puzzle to build all these animation clips while at the same time having this Chimera keyframe animated on top of it. Try to sync everything. It was a bit difficult, but very rewarding in the end. So this was a very close collaboration with cinematic designers as well to try and nail that timing together with this insane action sequence.
对于电影化团队来说，看似简单的坠落，实际上成为了整个流程中最为复杂的部分。他们投入了大量时间和精力，来确保这些高度脚本化的事件响应自如，简直就像是一门复杂的艺术。
Nothing there is procedural. Everything that was needed to be directed by us and put in a very specific, deliberate place, or like the distraction that is happening at a very precise moment. Like when you're falling through that concrete floor, the smoke needed to go off at a very precise, specific moment. The pieces of debris needed to clear out for you to be able to see where you're falling, and it needed to be clear that you fall down on the tank and roll off from it. So putting this specific part of the sequence was certainly the most challenging, but also the most fun.
虽然这段流程充满了电影般的视觉震撼，但赛博朋克毕竟是一款游戏，不是电影，因此即使是在非常脚本化的演出中，游戏仍然保留有一定的互动性。如果不够专心，突如其来的 QTE 事件可能会让你付出代价。
We try to never take the full control from the player for too long. It's kind of like a rule, like a philosophy of ours. Like there cannot be too long scenes, basically. And so on top of it being already difficult and containing multiple elements to piece together to work in perfect sync, we also made it so that you can get hit by the turret if you don't react quickly. If you don't manage to grab the cables, you will bounce off them, basically. And if you don't dodge the spider tank's leg, you get crushed by it. We wanted to kind of test the streamers a bit, that sometimes during the scenes they just tend to look at the chat maybe, not pay full attention to what's happening on the screen. In this case, and actually we witnessed it several times, they just died in the middle of the scene because they weren't paying attention. That's exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about scenes in Cyberpunk. You can never really look away. You can never put down your gamepad and just witness the event.
然而，玩家面临的最大挑战还在后头。着陆后，玩家会有短暂的喘息时间，以便观察并了解周围环境。但这片刻的歇息，实际上是暴风雨前的宁静。之前看似不可摧毁的敌人，此时已经因坠落有所削弱，但他仍会拼尽最后一丝力气，为玩家带来一场激烈的 Boss 战。
That's the part where cinematics gets in, and how do we cripple and try to damage this tank in any shape or form, right? So we managed to do all this whole chase, giving you the feeling and the illusion that it's a tough enemy and you cannot face it like this. But after the fall, maybe you had an intense fall that helped you destroy his defenses a little bit, so you can now face the tank.
这场战斗要求你对抗奇美拉和它的多种武器系统。这段流程让坦克的设计与游戏场景的设计完全结合，让游戏玩法和视觉设计相互影响。
On the early pre-production of Phantom Liberty, combat was supposed to happen on the street level. So we were thinking about the range combat, larger distances, big arena. Eventually, in the process of designing the expansion, we decided that it would be all held inside the buildings, right? And eventually in the abandoned metro station, which kind of changed the perspective.
The first actual iterations of that boss fight were more navigating around, sneaking around the tank. Tank was moving on its own. We didn't have time to do this and at the same time create this horror vibe of chasing you if you open a space straight ahead from the beginning. So the first limitation was like, he's not gonna have a proper locomotion on its own. Locomotion meaning he's gonna move on itself around. So we knew that we wanted kind of circular arena so that he reaches to you with all his arsenal, but he doesn't actually really needs to approach you. So he's rotating kind of its own in the middle.
when we ended up with the design of closing the whole arenas in the interiors, it completely changed the game, right? So we needed to adjust few things. But there was like a constant negotiation with the gameplay team. Basically, gameplay team at the beginning, I remember they wanted to have like a really fast and agile robot that runs over the ceiling, the walls, and it's all over the place. And we wanted to have something super heavy, static, slow, kind of inspired by Ghost in the Shell. Finding the compromise, it took us quite a time, right? But we found it was negotiating, meeting, talking, designing, experimenting, making storyboards also, repromatics, etc. The device itself, which is kind of designed to kind of fight on the medium and long range, now has to deal with us, the small opponent, which is kind of running around their feet. So we made a lot of adjustments of what kind of weapons it should use, for example, and how it should operate.
There's many weapons on that tank, and some of them very late. For example, we find out that being, I don't want to say completely static, but in the middle of the level, if the character goes too close to it, you can keep shooting. So we added this beam just to make the player go far away from it.
We had this case of the laser weaponry in the base game when you were fighting Roy's boss fight. So he was basically using the laser weapon that can sweep through the environment. So with the Chimera, we wanted to do it times 10. And what we aim here for is this constant feeling of the threat, but also it needed to give the player information that the laser gun is winding up to give them a chance to basically hide behind the cover and avoid the damage.
Watch the laser!
Take cover!
不过，奇美拉的武器并不是唯一需要调整的部分，它的装甲也需要重新设计。
Once we had a blockout, I knew that we needed armor, so I started designing the armor and what's underneath the armor and which places we wanted to be destroyed, because we also worked with weak spots and we wanted to, reveal them. We used the Kiroshi eyes to reveal them, so you just need to scan and you see them. So I didn't really need, to make them yellow or too obvious. It would be also kind of stupid for a weapon to show his weak spots. So using the Kiroshi eyes, it's a fantastic solution.
这是游戏玩法与艺术设计紧密合作的又一个优秀案例，而与其他类似这样的合作一起，为战斗的高潮铺平了道路。当玩家成功利用奇美拉的弱点将其瘫痪时，便到了给予致命一击的时刻。而这最后的终结方式就有关奇美拉的机械心脏，它正是内容团队各个部门之间紧密协作的完美体现。
We wanted this feeling to slowly, over the course of the sequence, to shift and make you as a player feel more and more in power. Finally, the finisher, we wanted to do this kind of exclamation point after the boss fight to really make the tank go out with the bang.
The gameplay guys asked me kind of late in the production that they wanted something to be used by the player. I was kind of lucky in that case because I had just the spot for it. So yeah, I got lucky there. So there's a cylinder in the top with a hatch that you can open, take the heart, it looks like a heart in fact, and toss it, destroy it.
And we wanted to be the heart to sound consistent with the Chimera approach to sound design when it needs to sound organic but mechanical at the same time. There's a really cool thing and the details in it when you just open the hatch and you can actually start hearing the heart beating, and then once you grab it and you rip it off, you can hear it's basically dying. And then there's a really cool thing when V just throws the heart and it lands on the ground.
So we have this Chimera core that resembles a heart, and that was kind of a conversation internally because we said like, what looks cooler than having a a beating heart of your enemy in your hand before you finish it off, right? And it's kind of the metaphor we wanted to do there. And later it was super cool because as well with this content team, multidisciplinary team, we managed to even make it a piece of loot, so later you can craft something out of it. So it's just a very cool ending for it.
We all need to come together, and that's why we work like this in CDPR, that we are in those content teams, because every iteration is an improvement on what we did, and every improvement is a holistic thing.
Rust and piss, shitbot!
团队合作的确能让梦想成真。然而，开发者们在各自部门之外，还有哪些任务让他们印象最为深刻呢？
I was impressed by not only the tank itself, but how the scene looked. Bringing all together and feel like we worked well as a team. I think is the best.
I think I was the most impressed by the amount of destruction we squeezed into the sequence, because I couldn't believe it that they said that they will make everything indestructible. I was like, how that's even possible? But they already made it. So that was pretty impressive. Every single pillar is being destroyed. It was assumption from the gameplay that they needed every single cover to be destructible to show the force, right? And not make player hide behind the column and just, slowly shoot to the spire to lower his health bar, right? They wanted player to actually face the tank and force the player to actually act.
Michał Spreżniak, the cinematic designer, man, this scene was just, with the tools we have in engine, this was a big challenge to set up everything and made it work from every point of view, from blending gameplay with cinematics, from managing all the dialogues, all the screaming around, all the sound. Like, he's kind of was the master orchestrator and putting everything together, right?
VFX, obviously, are a huge part of that, and the whole identity of the tank when it comes to the Blackwell AIs that are taking over him. The way it is presented on him, the way he has those, black and red pieces of corruption on him. The audio, of course, that makes him so menacing and scary, basically.
The enter is kind of already there because of the awesome visuals, and then you have this awesome driving track by P.T. Adamczyk that's also keeping you on the edge. So our job was pretty easy.
在一个充满巨型机器、崩毁的建筑以及复杂的脚本演出的关卡中，你可能会认为最大的挑战是一些炸裂的场景，但事实证明，最大的挑战往往是那些细微的细节。
Small things actually was to make Myers' rifle be attached to her back when it was necessary. You will not believe how many issues we had with this one. We either had two rifles attached to her back, sometimes the rifle was going directly through her head. This was probably the biggest issue for us in this entire sequence, the small rifle from Myers. If you look at our game, there is never a situation where characters put the guns on their back. It just doesn't happen. But she has a rifle, and since this is a main story, we didn't want to create this artificiality where the rifle is just disappearing when she's putting her away. So we had to come up with a method of her putting the rifle on her back and then taking it again seamlessly. Up until some point we had it easier because Myers at the beginning had a pistol, not a rifle. So it was simple, right? She would just hide it in her pants and that's it, the end of story. But no, it was decided that she needs to have a rifle, and the rifle then needs to be a reward for the player that you can also get. And it created a bit of a complication for us. But it was all fun and games.
Apologies.
游戏中所有的乐趣和挑战背后都蕴藏着数月的辛勤努力。奇美拉的遭遇战是赛博朋克2077中的一大亮点，它是往日之影中复杂的核心元素。如果没有开发团队各个部门的紧密合作，这一切都无法实现。这项任务蕴含着开发者们的满腔热情，正如它那充满金属感的护甲一样酷炫。
We're clear. I detect no more